of young people, family and community institutions. Can you all hear me at the back? You can't. I'll just shout a bit louder and hope the microphone thing works. I'm Isabel Hardman and I'm editor of the Spectator's Coffee House blog, and I'm going to be chairing today's discussion. I'm delighted to introduce our panel of speakers who will be debating how policy making can help families and communities tackle the kind of social breakdown that led to last summer's riots. So I'll go along with the panel. We have James Probert, who's Programme Director at City Year. Next to him, we have got Richard Sved, who's Director of Income and External Affairs at LEAP. Next to me is David Burrowes, who's PPS Street Council Board. Next to David, to Owen Patterson. Sorry. Next to him is Amar, who's Chief Executive of the Small Business Consultancy, who are our co-hosts for today's event. And at the end is Phillip, Blond from ResPublica. So we're going to have short speeches from each panel, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you want to tweet about this event, the hashtag is #RPFringe. You can tweet at ResPublica. Can we go to start?
Oh, great. Okay, thanks. My name's James. As you've heard, I work for a voluntary national service organisation called City Year. It strikes me that all too often, the missed opportunity in youth policy and policy about communities is to treat young people as the problem, as a client that needs a resource handed to them and a solution applied to them, rather than as a resource themselves. And as anyone who works with young people knows, young people are themselves resourceful, they are passionate, they have certain unique abilities. We joke at my organisation that to join up you have to be old enough to change the world but young enough to still want to. And okay, that's a youth of attitude. It doesn't, not necessarily the age in your passport, but nevertheless it often comes with starting out in life, being able to take in some cases a really long period of time, a year perhaps of full-time volunteering, and serve your community. And I think if we're going to join up initiatives taken by central government, initiatives that are often broad, top-down or structural, that aren't about really unpicking what we know is very, very hard, which is dealing with challenges that arise from troubled families, unique local situations, a lack sometimes not just of financial resources, but of the kind of mental and social equipment that makes it easy for children to do well at school, understand why they need to do well and go on to do well in life. If we're going to tackle those things top-down, we need to be liberating and applying the resource that is young people, and in turn we are able to make a difference to their lives, young people who volunteer. So if you like, I'm in favour of a supply-side approach to this problem, rather than just piling in resources from top down. And of course that's not to say that there aren't great ideas from people much cleverer than me, much more qualified to talk about them, to do with family structures, access to benefits, access to healthcare, and reform in the teaching and learning side of education. What it would be nice to see is a recognition of young people giving up their time to volunteer. At the moment that isn't taken account of in the benefit system, for example. It isn't offset against statements that, whatever else you might think about their pros and cons, are sweeping about the fact that it isn't right, as we've just heard recently from IDS and George Osborne in their article in the Daily Mail. They said it's not right that people who leave school and go straight onto housing benefit without getting a job should be supported in those benefits. And that's, of course, to draw a perfect distinction between leaving school and going into work, or leaving school and going into an unemployed benefit position. But full-time volunteering is often a great bridge for those young people, and it's a great opportunity even for people who would otherwise take a job. So what we're doing in putting those young people in a position effectively of power is also satisfying some of the needs that we know the riots have left amongst young people. What we were told about the riots was that it showed that people didn't feel that they belonged to their communities, or at least the way that the media and those in power perceive those communities. Ties of your local church or your local high street or your local school didn't seem to mean much to people who were busy looting that high street and blockading that school and burning down parts of London. But there are community ties that are immensely important to young people. They are obviously no different from people in any other part of the country or any other age group or any other period of history. And by creating positive affiliations, allowing third sector organisations, but recognising that from government to build up up a sense of identity, commonality, a sense of serving the community, we can also begin to create role models, which are fundamentally, I think, the solution to many of the problems of disengagement that young people are facing across parts of our big cities, where they just don't feel that there is anything in society for them. So this summer, the Olympics showed that people are prepared to get behind even some of the old-fashioned communities, if you want to put it that way, Britain being the best example. People from all sorts of backgrounds, very proud about being British, sticking a British flag on their arm, as our young volunteers do in the uniforms that they wear, and we're unapologetic about that, and going out and becoming role models for younger people who can identify with them. That's the unique power that young people have, but at the same time are identifying with the discipline that they bring with them, the private sector links that they bring with them through our leadership development programme, which is an essential part of volunteering. You've got to get something back. You've got to find it easier to go on into work. And that, I think, is the message. If we see solutions to young people not being engaged in society and not doing as well as they can at school as a double benefit, it's a great thing for the young people who get involved, and it's a great thing for the work that they do, the work they carry out. Then we're somewhere along the road to being able to establish some of the programs that have been successful in the US, where you look at AmeriCorps, harnesses huge amounts of people to do something, and they grow through volunteering, and indeed part-time volunteering. We know how valuable that is. There's a full-time scope for that too. And I think our tradition's always been a little bit different from the one in the US, where my organisation, City Year, was born, perhaps because in the 1930s, Roosevelt's attitude to harnessing people, the Civilian Conservation Corps, was that there was something they were going to achieve. It was almost secondary. It wasn't secondary, of course. It was key to his idea of getting the nation back to work, but it was almost secondary that these people would then be having something useful to do. What was really key was that they'd be out there building infrastructure, changing the way America looked, putting in place things that now any visitor to America and certainly citizens rely on, the paths, the roads, the dams. And I think we need to see young people in the same way. It's a tremendous wasted resource not to be harnessing young people, giving them a sense of identity, giving them a role of power in their communities that they're helping to build, but that aren't in any way inimical to the communities that we'd like them to build. And in doing so, I think there is a room for top-down policy, but it isn't all about top-down policy. It's an enabling supply-side set of policies that will make most sense.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me at the back? Good, great. So I'm Richard. I'm from the charity Leap Confronting Conflict. I'm going to say a little bit about what Leap Confronting Conflict does, and then a little bit about two initiatives that Leap has been involved with in response to the riots, and then finally just leave you with a couple of thoughts in response to the questions that I was sent about this event. Firstly, why Leap exists. So whether it's arguments in the playground or unresolved anger or even truancy, exclusion, gang violence, conflict is inevitable in the lives of young people, and we believe that young people are actually the best placed people to resolve that conflict, the conflicts in their own lives. What they need, however, are the skills to be able to do so, and that's what Leap exists to do. James mentioned that young people are not the problem, and I know that the trainers, when our Leap trainers, whenever they begin a session with young people, the first thing they say is, we're not the experts, you are. They're the ones that understand what is needed. And over 25 years, Leap has built up experience and knowledge and expertise in critical areas of conflict, such as leadership, weapon carrying, mediation, group offending, and so on. And we work in prisons, we work in schools, we work in pupil referral units. So, two initiatives that Leap has been involved with following the riots. Firstly, the Commission on Youth. The Commission on Youth is something that Leap has been invited to contribute towards. It's a partnership between ResPublica and NICFIS, the National Council for Voluntary Youth Services. It's lasting from April this year to April next year, and the aims of the Commission on Youth are to redefine the terms of debate around the riots. The steering group includes youth groups, private businesses, politicians, young people, local government staff, a very wide range. And it's looking in a variety of areas. The main areas are young people's interaction with authority figures in schools. Secondly, family structure and community support, whether, for example, family structure and the community support provides opportunities to promote and fulfil aspirations. And thirdly, young people's engagement and participation, in other words, active citizenship along the lines that James has already been talking about. The second initiative I'd like to talk about today is the Resilience Consortium, which LEAP has led on with 30 sectoral partners. And that was an initiative looking to build a sustainable response to the riots. We were aiming to create programs that support young people in their communities. When we did our preliminary analysis on those people that were arrested following the riots, what was very clear was that by far the largest group was 18 to 24-year-olds. They were the largest group of offenders, 2.5 times more than, for example, under 18s. But our analysis has also revealed that they're the most vulnerable group. There are gaps in the service, there are difficulties as they make the transition into adulthood. We've got some funding from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation to do some research looking more particularly into this particular age group. We're talking to 800 18 to 24-year-olds in 4 London boroughs, and actually around the corner here in Birmingham in Winston Green. And from there we're going to be developing programmes to build resilience among young people and in the communities that they live. Finally, I just wanted to leave you with 2 thoughts. I'm not actually leaving the room, but I want to close with two thoughts. Firstly, what we think it's about is it's about connecting services. That's what's needed. Services that are focused on young people, so that young people don't have to navigate from one organisation to the next. That's been shown, for example, in the much quoted community initiative to reduce violence in Glasgow, which David Cameron's been talking about relatively recently. And as a result of that work, which was really cross-sector, there was a 46% drop in violent crime. The second point I wanted to make was that I think we need to reframe the debate around educational underachievement. At LEAP, we would argue that attainment isn't the first step. The first step, and that's what we primarily focus on, is on character, on developing an understanding about what is right and what is wrong, and on developing a responsibility for the choices that we make, and also an understanding of the choices that we have. And it's that changed behaviour that we believe leads to improved attainment thereafter, and it's that will lead to a more cohesive society.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've spent most of the day in defending the back line of the MPs against the press. Hopefully we managed to keep everyone away and win that battle, and then defending marriage on the town hall. So it's great to be able to come on the front foot here and talk about how we can do something about what sadly happens in the streets in my area as well as other areas of London. And that's the issue. I mean, I come from Enfield, member of Parliament for Enfield, and grown up there. There's others here from Enfield as well. And Enfield is a great place to be, but by the fact that last year we had riots, making a bit of feedback noise, but the fact that we had riots in Enfield, you'd have to ask the question, why Enfield? Because Enfield doesn't wholly fit into the picture you'd have of a place that would be full of wanton vandalism and destruction and organised violent disorder. But the question is a very good one, because it means that I think we need to drive further and deeper into finding the answers to it. Because certainly you couldn't say the riots in Enfield was simply around as a result of a particular protest, as in perhaps the early genesis of the riots. You couldn't say also it wasn't simply around issues around poverty issues and social disaffection, although there were young people and others involved who no doubt were disaffected, and some that were poor. But the reality and the profile, as is becoming clear in Enfield, was that it was about a breakdown involving relationships, and that's something which takes time to unpick and times to sort out. And I'm not coming before you saying I've got great magic solutions to the problem, but I think it's important to identify, which I welcome with ResPublica, to look beyond just simply the answers that us politicians would come out with. Because I know when Parliament was recalled, my instinct was to talk, and perhaps moralistically, to talk about the family, and you'd expect the right of the spectrum to talk about the family, and the left to talk about social disaffection and poverty. And we just need to get a bit beyond that. And Enfield's example helps us to do that, because there are elements of all of that, but fundamentally there's a relational problem that is around the relationships between adults and young people, about the character that was spoken about the cultural values of what we respect and who, both people, both authority figures, and both what values make young people go out and either take part in disorder or otherwise watch and admire people going after the latest brand and the rest of it. And it's and it must drive us deeper into solutions. And that makes me think of Enfield again, because my involvement before being a politician was spending my time in Enfield and in the local police station with many of the young people and others and young offenders, some of whom ended up on the streets in Enfield last year. And I think about them and as to what led them into acts of disorder, becoming some of the most prolific offenders around Enfield, and what solutions do they cry out for. And I think of one person, Mark, who is someone who could well have been in that riot if other things hadn't happened. And he was someone who was a very, very prolific criminal, great bravura, going around parading his badge, not only of crimes committed, but also the badge that he got whilst in Feltham and other places, and how he's progressed. Now, I saw him as one of my first clients. He had great aspirations. He probably would have been in the Olympics if everything had gone well, lifting weights for England, but ended up lifting the hatches of Feltham and Pentonville and the rest of it, and graduating into not education but into crime and drugs and alcohol and the rest of it. Now, the thing that just made him wake up to his responsibility to others, a relationship, was the fact that as he went through the criminal justice system, his relationships became ever more poorer. On the friends and family list, when you have your phone call, you have the list of friends and family. The sad reality for him was that I was top of the list as his solicitor. And that's just shocking, isn't it? I was the continual relationship that he had, well, it was eventually me, which wasn't necessarily bad for my firm in terms of him committing crime in and out, but it wasn't very good for his relationships, and certainly not good for the relationships and others that he caused carnage around Enfield. But he, on two occasions, it just made me reminded of what the deeper things we need to look at is when he was in the cells in Enfield, and he was not crying out as usually he would do, shouting out for a cigarette or for when he's going to get released. But this time it was, where's his father? And his father, sadly, during the time had been pretty absent or at least not involved. And he was crying out for him, for that role model. And that made me think, well, that's something where we really got to further. But also, he himself became a father, and suddenly the light switched on in his head, and he realised that the responsibility is beyond feeding his own habit and simply just feeding his interests and activities around theft mainly and drugs into someone else, into the other. And it's the other which we need to make a connection with. The people on the streets of Enfield didn't care about the other. They cared about themselves and didn't really care about the consequences. And so it's led me to particularly look at that whole area in terms of particularly drugs and alcohol. I've been involved with Oliver Letwin in terms of pushing to have a more outcome-focused approach to addictions, but also not just looking at the individual who needs treatment, but the whole family solution.
And I really welcome the opportunities that are coming through. Social impact bonds, Birmingham's one of the 40 million pilots, looking at a whole host of areas of problems that are affecting these young people and others, but trying to look beyond an individual treatment to real outcomes that philanthropists, investors and others are getting involved in. Obviously it has huge impact not only on that individual lives and the family around them, but also the taxpayers as well, who have to pick up a huge bill. So, I mean, I don't want to go on for too long, but I suppose just coming back into Enfield and elsewhere, it is long-term solutions that we need, but local. And government can only do so much in all this. And I've come across different projects and initiatives, Fathered Institute really kind of pushing for more fathers to be involved in carers situations. I've come across Care, who are involved in the mum and the dad sticking together at a very young age of their baby, and that's so crucial and important to make sure that those marks of this world, this isn't just an issue of, we can often think of families in a very middle-class aspect way. It is something that affects and is a matter of social justice, that it affects the issues that happen in Enfield that I saw with my clients day to day. But what we also need to do is hear less from me and more from the people who are the real champions, people, for example, who are in recovery. There was a chap called Kevin Dooley who I met the terrace of the House of Commons, and he said, look, I spent the last 5 years, 5 years ago, I spent my time just on the streets along Westminster Bridge, and then I ended up in St Thomas's Hospital with an overdose. And the way that I managed to break out of all that was the connection, the other, which was a daughter. In fact, he'd gone into addictions because he'd lost his son, he'd lost contact with his family, and then it was his daughter who made connection with him on the streets, and then got him that connection again with society. And we've got to do more about connecting people with him, because he is a massive inspirational champion. He's now leading others into recovery and telling others about it. And it's ways that we can make that connection and instill that other that was nowhere there on Enfield. But we saw with the Olympics, we saw in the compassion, the respect, the service, that those great volunteers that made the Olympics. And that comes really, that sustained presence. It won't come from us having another project of volunteers, although we can do that. That will help. It comes from supporting good and strong families that instill those values of respect and service and compassion that we can then not just sell to the world through the Olympics, but in communities that suffer like Enfield.
I'm going to grab that microphone. Stand up, that's all right, I'll put it back, I promise. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay, fantastic. David, I've read your essay on this subject with real interest. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to read David's quite a short essay on this subject area, but it was very interesting. He brought around some key points which I hope we're going to cover in this discussion. And interestingly, we've also launched a social impact bond. I think we need to look at the regulatory barriers around that before we start promoting more investment into these vehicles, but that's another subject altogether. Now, I wanted to start by saying that I'm not here, and I don't believe any of us are here to make your heart bleed about these problems. For me, what's really important today is trying to look at a positive way forward, see this as an opportunity, not as a problem, and actually work a way forward. The Olympics and the riots were a tale of two legacies, one year after the other. And again, the key thing here is looking at how we can tackle the problem of troubled families. I'm not going to go into statistics on how many families there are, because there's arguments about whether the figures are correct or not. What I do want to speak about is what we've been doing, and a kind of a creative example around what my positive solution to the problem might be. Now, I run a community organisation that's co-hosted this, as Isabel said. We're the Small Business Consultancy. We work with recovering drug addicts, ex-offenders, young people, both and adults from troubled family backgrounds. We spoke out a lot in the riots. You might have seen me on the BBC News with one of our young people who actually did a placement in one of our small businesses, who then ended up becoming the chief exec of Islington Council's office apprentice. And I remember sitting in the office of that young person before he came onto one of our programmes. He had 17 key workers around that table. He punched one of the key workers during that meeting and was escorted out of the police van, escorted out by the police into a van. My calculations kind of said that meeting cost about £5,000, just the hour, well, actually 45 minutes that we're in there. Now, that's the kind of problems that we need to be tackling. And if business can play a role in that, then I'm really going to try and champion that. Now, my own journey, I came from a troubled background. I was one of these young people, and my sustained recovery, as one would say, came from the implementation of 4 key things. These 4 key things are now the basis of our values at the Small Business Consultancy, and the 4 key things that I kind of want to speak to you about today. The first one is inspiration. How can we reduce that gap between aspiration and opportunity? The second is positive role models from all walks of life. Engaging with these troubled families, how can we bring those role models into these families in a creative and innovative way? The third is incentive. Why the bloody heck should I change? You know, a lot of people are in this cycle and really have no incentive to change. And there is an amazing world out there that I'm now experiencing. I probably wouldn't have seen it. And the fourth one is a stable environment. How do we create that stability? If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basis is physiological needs. To get to self-esteem, you need to go through the physiological needs first. Now, I want to share an example with you of a typical situation we see every day in the work that we do, and people in my organisation on the ground deal with every day. A typical young person on one of our programmes is a father that's left prison unemployed on a drug rehabilitation remand order, we know as DRR orders. Now, this young person, we would think, has had a false start in life right from the start. He's had no positive role models in the household, anything but a stable environment, and nobody to incentivise that person. You can see the problem here. Then we look at another situation, the recent death of Eva Rausling, one of the wealthiest women in the country, who abused Class A drugs in front of her children. She wouldn't have shown up as a troubled family. The family, you know, she abused her drugs in a £70 million home. You know, so we look at 2 situations here, and there's a common factor in these 2 situations, and it's purpose, actually, and lack of, in these 2 instances, lack of purpose. How can we bring positive role models, a stable environment, incentives to these families in a creative and innovative way? Now, my point here is the economy is a big priority. I understand that. The government have pushed the economy left, right and centre. They've been left with no money. We've heard all the excuses. I understand that. And actually, they're probably not excuses. I haven't seen the balance sheets. I don't know what it's like. I know that the resources are not infinite here. But is this problem actually undermining us tackling a really big burgeoning problem of troubled families? We know that youth unemployment has a net present value of £28 billion. What is the net present value of youth? What is the net present value of troubled families in this country? Now, the 2 families that I spoke about, one, there was a need. You know, there wasn't a need, and there wasn't a want, because they had stable environments, in one for a better word, financially. If you look at the Eva Rausling case, they probably didn't need to work. But what if they wanted to do something? And the family with a parent that had come out of prison recently, what if they wanted to work or have something better? Were there too many barriers in their place to actually help him integrate back into society? How can we tackle troubled families and the economy together as a common solution, as one common solution? I think we can do it through business. Actually, what we do at the Small Business Consultancy is actually champion people from troubled families to set up their own businesses and gain some purpose. And it's not all about just setting up businesses. It's about progression through using the principles of business and enterprise. Let me put this in context for you. If we look at the family that I mentioned, the first family, who would have showed up on a troubled family register. Now, if the father, upon leaving prison, was put through a provision where he had the chance, through using the food hygiene certificate that he would have got while he was in prison, to set up a small business on release with a community organisation like ours. He was then supported by a mentor who owned a restaurant, and simultaneously the children are being put through a provision, both in partnership with the school, and if they're not in school, something they can access from home, something like what you should be seeing on the screen. I'm not sure you'll see the platform that we've actually developed on the screen too. This can be accessed both in prison and at home, and from any location. Now, if the child was put through something like this, and the parent was supported to start their own business, can you see the bigger picture here? We're using business as a force for positive social change. Now, tackling problematic families through the principles of business is a groundbreaking, innovative, and slightly different way of doing things. but it's worked for us, and it's worked. Our track record can prove that. Now, this conference is about aspiration, unlocking enterprise, and actually empowering people and giving them a positive purpose. What this is all about here is how can we turn what is a current liability in our economy into an asset. We have to look at this as an opportunity. There is a massive opportunity here to flip what we've seen as a liability, what we've been seeing as a problem, into an actual asset. These families setting up their own businesses or being more inspired through the principles of business by getting a purpose can actually start contributing to the economy, creating those jobs and get the engine moving. And what we need to do is bring the power of business together to try and create this change. We are a democracy, and this is a democratic thing to do. Give power back to the people. Give them the chance to actually mobilise and tackle their own problems. Just give them that stable environment so they can do it in. We need to remember one thing as well, that great talent can come from anywhere. And what we want to do here, and if we see this as an opportunity, not as a problem, we will have to transform our country into what it should be. A world leader in skills, the best place in the world to do business, and a workforce that's aspirational and entrepreneurial. Thank you very much.
I'll take it, yeah.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I'm very inspired by the fact you stood up and the energy, was projected from there. I'm not going to mimic it because it's a rainy day in Manchester and it's not Manchester, but it looks like it. So that tells you our conference fatigue has set in. But what I really want to talk about is what I think is the crucial issue. And what I think is radical in the ResPublica proposal is there is a new analysis and a new claim. So we know the standard results of the post-riot situation. On the right, a complete loss of morality and destruction of normativity and a refusal of convention. And I agree with that. And on the left, it's all directly caused by poverty, by exclusion. And I agree with that. But we need to put them together if we're really going to create an analysis that actually captures something. And I'll repeat, and I apologise, you already know this, roughly 2/3 of those involved in the rioting had special educational needs. Another 2/3, roughly the same proportion, were already known to the criminal justice system. And then another factor, which I learned at a recent DL, Department for Local Governments and Communities working group, is labour force participation. Where people were in work, there was much lower rates of rioting, and labour force participation had the same level of causation. Now, human events are never caused by one factor, they're multivalent. But what ResPublica believes is the real cause behind this is essentially we are producing young people without ties that bind to the family, without ties that bind them to each other, to their community, to their locality, and to their future, and to this country. And what we've produced at the bottom, what I love about the rhetoric of individualism, is everybody wins in our society wins not because of individualism, but because of family networks, connections, upbringing. The rhetoric of individualism carries with it great penalties, and they're always paid by the poor, because it's the poor who are most individuated, if you forgive that English language. It's the poor. Individualism is a disaster for the poor. Because we know from everyone who wins, you win by your connections, you win by your family, you win, you even win before you're born, because the family you're born into is already functioning as a family, has already decided to commit resources to you, will read to you, will create an educational environment. And this is one of the most depressing things about our society, is the game's already been played before you're born. And when you live in a society that has the rhetoric, I hate social mobility, and one of the reasons I hate it is that it conceals a deep lie. And there's several levels to this lie. One is escape from your community is somehow worthy. And two, that those who left behind are a failure. And three, it assumes social mobility is something you can do by yourself. Again, everything we know about the modern world tells us success comes from social networks, from society, from capital endowment, and from all the soft and hard assets that wealthy, successful people pass on to their children. And if you do any studies of the world, what you see is those rewards are increasing. Marriage, which used to be something that allowed classes actually to marry outside of their class, now people only marry within their class. It's called assorted mating, and that compounds. And so whereas marriage and social ties used to be something that would cross class boundaries, no longer. And again, if you look at the sociological evidence, what is frightening is Britain is becoming a world of ever-decreasing circles. We know less and less people unlike ourselves. More and more of us are associating with people like ourselves. And if you think about the internet, one of the reasons the internet is in some senses quite politically damaging, even though it's invigorating in others, is it collects people who think alike together and confirms your prejudices and shuts you out from a world. It's one of the reasons Pew Research recently did a big study in America, and they said American politics has never been so polarised, and one of that is the functions of the internet. You only meet people who agree with you, and you organise around people who agree with you. It's really quite frightening. So what I want to suggest to you is, if we really give a damn, and we may not, but if we do, we have to rebuild the institutions for those at the bottom of society. Individualism is fatal for them. It's good for us for those at the top of society, when we've got all the resources that allow us advantage. So what do we do to rebuild institutions? And that's what I'd love to talk about with you all. Well, I think, first of all, we have to create a culture. And creating a culture is the hardest thing to do, but it's the most effective thing to do. And what would it be to create a culture? Well, that's kind of what I would like to discuss with us all here. I think, first of all, there's an economic element to it. And one of the reasons I think big society is good, and we should push on it and radicalise it, use the localism bill and extend it, is for the first time what the government has done, and this is right, is allow people to group together, to come together with very little so they can have much, much more. And that provides an economic base for association. But what we need is a new cultural base for association. One of the things I was looking at in the Daily Telegraph is, culturally, the Girl Guides have just done a study, and they're now arguing that girls are no longer interested in marriage, and actually it's boys. I mean, I always knew men were the romantic ones, but and it's boys who actually believe in marriage and girls don't. Well, let me give you some consequences of what this actually means, and then I'll finish and open up for the debate. And if I may read, and I'm reading for myself, which won't surprise you, but it's in order to reinforce the ResPublica point. One of the things I think is so fatal is that the family has become a polarised political debate, and somehow it's right-wing and reactionary to believe in the family. I believe in the family because it's progressive. It's the vehicle for genuine progressive renewal at the bottom of society. But what's happening is that actually we're not supporting the family. If you look at the benefits system, for instance, a single mother of two has seen her benefits increase by 85%. And at the same time, the tax burden based on a one-earner family, two parents and plus two children, on an average wage, is 39% higher in Britain than in OECD countries. And we're now in a situation that children in Britain are now 3 times as likely to live in one-parent households than they were in 72. A third to a half of all British children will at some point live in a one-parent family, and a third of all British children at any one time are living with just one parent. In 1971, less than 10% of all births in England and Wales were outside marriage. In 2008, 45% of all births were. Now this matters, and marriage matters, because people who are unmarried have far greater trouble in staying together. By the time a child is 5, 43% of unmarried parents have broken up, versus 8% for married couples. Over 7 million Britons now live alone, compared to 3 million in 1971, creating widespread anonymity and social fragmentation. Now, since 70% of young offenders come from one-parent families, a third of all prisoners come from families so dysfunctional they were taken into care by the state. Family structure isn't a function of right-wing ideology. Family structure is necessary, because if people who are closer to you don't care for you, who else will? And it's not by accident that we're born into families, because families are what first nurture us and create the conditions for social success. So if we can, my fundamental question is, we really want to help people, and we really want to help young people, we've got to recreate family structures. Now, some of them, I come from one-parent family, so I'm not trying to do anything prejudicial. What can we do to restore both family and family-type structures, family-type institutions for young people? And I think if we can do that, we can rebuild culture. And if we can rebuild culture and institution, which is what ResPublica wants to do, because we think that's most crucial, then I think we can actually tackle these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our panellists. Before I open up the debate to questions from the floor, I'm just going to ask the members of the panel whether there's anything they want to respond to directly that one of their fellow panellists has said. Yep.
I don't choke. Conference cold. Sorry, do excuse me. I really want to respond to what you just said about family structure. I don't know if we've read recently about what Scotland are doing around a parenting strategy. They've announced an £80 million fund to help parents, and especially single parents that might find it difficult. Now, I think one of the key points here is that it's not our choice which family that we're born into. It's what happens once you're born within that family, how we can actually provide purpose to that family. Now, coming from, my father was a businessman, actually. He was a jeweller, he still is a jeweller. I had that underpinning my success almost as an entrepreneur. Even though I battled homelessness, a drug addiction, being kicked out of school at the age of 17, I had something there to look at in my family household. Now, this is not typical for the troubled families that we go through, what we see in society today. Unless you look at the Rouslings, that was another story altogether. But the common factor here, I think, is purpose or lack of purpose. How can we actually bring purpose to these families? And going back to the social mobility point as well, it's about bridging the gap. There are, we can't deny that there are people that are on a different level of social class to other people. But can we bridge that gap somehow? And what's the tool to actually bridge that gap is my point. And I strongly believe that business is a really good tool to do that. We've proven that at TSBC, and I think that can be done. That was my kind of response.
Yeah, just following from what Phillip said, and just endorsing what he said about the family crossing political boundaries and getting into the heart of the issue of, and I call it an issue of social justice. I think I was did this inquiry with the Centre for Social Justice around the area of addictions, and I was particularly struck by one girl who'd been through the whole process of care, having been exploited by her stepfather, and then in and out and accommodated by the local authority, eventually on the streets and in addictions and so forth. But she said, if a politician like me said family values, she wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. It was only when she ended up in this rehab that this couple were able to show her something of their values. Actually, when I realised that I was loved and accepted for the first time, she started to understand what it was about her family, and then she herself now, through that modelling of that couple who run this rehab, she herself now is supporting others through those family values, as it were. But a different example is something more local in Enfield, where there's a social enterprise that's involved in opening up, helping to encourage families to open up their house for a meal, to eat, to talk, to have relationships with people who otherwise wouldn't have anywhere to go to, that are doing that through social networks, and also opening up, they've got a room spare, and families doing that, and themselves, just as perhaps years ago happened within communities where strong families weren't just this, as can often happen these days, we just keep it to ourselves. They opened their doors and were strong in supporting a community and helping to model that. And those are practical initiatives that may help.
Okay. I just wanted to respond to something that Phillip said as well. And actually, in wholehearted agreement, it was about the exact words he used were, you only meet people who agree with you. And I found that fascinating. We're not used to managing conflict in our society, and that is Leap's expertise, and especially young people. I think it's a polarizing thing. You're either with me or you're against me, and what we teach is that conflict can be a creative force, and it needs to be understood and managed.
Yeah. I think you've got your own one.
My own personal line. Yes, Philip's getting all the running. It's a comment of his also that I want to draw on. He said creating a culture is hard. Broadly, I agree with the thrust of what Philip was saying. I think perhaps he'd agree with me. Actually, culture happens. I mean, that's going to occur anywhere. Young people will build their own culture if there isn't one that we approve of for them to join. And that's why gangs exist. Gangs are referred to often as families by the young people who are in them, because they simulate these environments. Now, it would be great if we were successful at creating lots of happy families. It's not great to keep people in unhappy families. Some families won't work. The question, and the reason I think we've all at some level or another mentioned role models, is about whether or not people who don't have a great family background, don't have a kind of Eva-rousing £70 million house, aren't born into that win that Philip talked about, do they know that there is an alternative? Do they know how to get there? The reason that we all know in our hearts that role modelling works is because young people are absolutely thirsting for a culture, for somewhere to belong, and to do that in a good way. You know, a young person doesn't want to live the unpleasant life of being in a gang, but if it's a way that they get some safety, some security, a group of people around them who are on their side, they will. But if they know there's another way, if they see role models opening up any number of potential cultures. I mean, creating a culture would be hard if you literally wanted to say, this is the culture you must all subscribe to, and it was a slightly Enid Blyton 1950s world of our vision of Britishness. That's obviously not going to work. You can't impose a culture on people. But allowing people to grow into positive cultures of their own is absolutely possible. And I would compare this to the problem of governing an illiterate country. If your country has 80% illiteracy, the difficult bit isn't actually teaching people to read and write. We all know how to teach someone to read and write. Individually, it's not that difficult, and most people do it at school. It just seems a daunting prospect because there are so many people. How do you apply the resources to the right place? But in individual circumstances, we've all given examples, or are examples, of how young people can turn their lives around, how you can overcome terrible backgrounds and disadvantages. And that's about getting access to those cultures that do work. And that's why role models are so powerful. It's about knowing, what are my other options, how do I get there? And that's why on-the-ground work is so important, and really enabling that is the way forward to support families and positive cultures.
Right, but it's now time for the audience to ask questions. With the mic that's coming out. If I could ask you to try to keep your questions short and make questions that actually include questions rather than statements, that would be really helpful. Start at the back with staff.
Alison Seabrook, Community Development Foundation. It was really, again, a question for Philip, that the whole notion of marriage and creating sustainable and loving environments, you can't dispute that, but I have a real contention with the issue of suggesting that should be around marriage. I'm much more with the actual form of having role models in the extended family. So my question is, with that notion then, would we be prescribing that, or because I'm always conscious that this sort of thing gets turned into policy, potentially. Yeah, exactly. And would we be prescribing that then for middle class families who are also dysfunctional in broken families, like mine? That whole embodiment, and even in upper class families.
Great, I'll take two more and then
Okay, Stephanie Elsie. I'm not actually sure who we're actually talking about today, because it seems to me that the overwhelming majority of young people has no problem whatsoever, and we don't need to worry about them. So we're talking about a much smaller group of people who probably come from dysfunctional families. So talking about the family, as David said earlier, doesn't really connect with them at all. And if you're talking about young people that have drug problems, get into gangs and all of that, these are community, I would argue, and people have been working on them for many, many years, and we sort of know what works because people have managed to do things that work from time to time. What we've not been very good at is capturing that and then replicating it and doing it consistently. And you get into existential questions about things like love and evil and bad behaviour and all of that, which hasn't really been mentioned so far, but I actually think needs to be on the table. But if you're trying to solve this, you know, there's been a hell of a lot of research being done on the sorts of people that I think we are talking about, which are the dysfunctional individuals and communities and families. We kind of know what the issues are. There are things like low self-esteem. I mean, I slightly disagree. It's not just about aspiration. A lot of it is about low self-esteem. A lot of people, the one thing in common with drug users, whether they come from poor families or from very rich ones, is that they hate themselves. That's why they're slowly killing themselves. And fixing low self-esteem isn't easy. There are lots of methods that people have used, and I used to run a drug rehab, and you know, sometimes we were successful, but frankly we didn't know why we were successful. It's very unscientific, a lot of this. And there's a lot of research that I would argue still needs to be done as to understanding why is it that some people have such low self-esteem. Can you fix that? Is it nurture or nature? We don't even know the answers to that one, and people will debate that endlessly as well. So it's an incredibly complicated topic that needs to be addressed in a very thoughtful and systematic way. And I don't think I've got the answer either. That all the things that we've been talking about help and could help, but what you need is a much bigger approach to this that deals with all the complications at different points in time. Starting from, I would argue, in school, learning about relationships. What does it mean to get married?
What's your sort of question?
Sorry, I know.
No,
but
I know you're very passionate about it.
Yeah, no, I'm very passionate, but I just thought I'd throw those out, and maybe the panel can respond.
I think it's made some really good points.
Yeah. Just one more question. The woman in the black coat around there.
Thank you. Quick question. What will be the impact on families of forcing under 25s to stay at home rather than allowing them or supporting them to leave home? Do we think that's going to have a positive impact on families? How do you think these families that we're talking about today are going to cope with that? Do you think that's a recipe for more conflict?
Thank you very much. Well, we'll go along the panel. If any members feel they don't want to answer the question, that's good.
Okay, thanks. First of all, agree wholeheartedly with the first two question askers. I mean, that's exactly right. I think we do largely know what works, and a lot of the solution isn't really policy. It's just enabling what's already happening that's good. Really, at its best, the big society should be about throwing open the doors, opening the floodgates, however you want, whatever mixed metaphor you want to throw in, but it's about essentially supply-side third sector. It's about enabling those people who know how to create these one-on-one, meaningful relations in society to get on with it, and there is no shortage of resource out there. Young people are the solution, as well as, in some cases, the thing that we want to do something about. As for the housing benefit suggestion for under 25s, and I'm no expert on troubled families, and I won't comment on that. All I will say is that a lot of the young people who are working in our teams across London and soon Birmingham, who are creating these one-to-one relationships, wearing a uniform with a flag on it, going out there and being amazing role models, are doing so and are enabled to do that because they're able to claim housing benefit. They are a world away from those people who are being identified, right or wrong, and it's not my position to comment on that, having left school and gone straight into claiming benefits and not working. And I think if we're going to take seriously the idea of mobilising this cohort of young people and this resource, we need to be unafraid of giving them status and saying, this is important, we value this, that comes with a deal, perhaps involving benefits, perhaps involving tuition fees, because you're doing something for us. You're putting in more than you're getting out from the deal that you've got with the state. So at least in that area where I do know what I'm talking about, it would be catastrophic for the work we're doing. And I think that needs to be looked at the very least to distinguish between not just in work and out of work, but volunteering is something that's really valuable when not everybody can get a job under the age of 25.
I'd just like to agree with Alison to a certain extent to say I think it perhaps is a bit of a red herring to talk about marriage, and it does make you think about different classes. I'm a child of a broken home, but a middle class one, and I've done okay, I think. Following on from what Stephanie said, I, although it wasn't a question, it very much links to a lot of the work that LEAP does about unpacking the vicious cycle that it comes from thoughts through to feelings and then behaviour, and an understanding of how that is a cyclical process. So you think you have no self-worth, and therefore you act it out and it becomes a vicious circle. So very much agree with you there. Do have questions and issues about the under 25s staying at home, especially as a lot of the young people that we work with, it's that fractured family relationship that's very much the cause of a lot of their problems.
David, I'm sure we're keen to hear what your views are on the housing benefit costs.
Yeah, I thought we had a choice of not answering some of the questions. I'll come to that last. Just dealing with the issue of marriage, first of all. I mean, certainly marriage isn't a panacea, and it's certainly not going to be for everyone, but it is a general good for society. It's something that the state certainly should act as a disincentive towards, which it has historically recently been seen to do. And I say that because it is generally seen evidentially as a good foundation for children, but also in terms of stabilising relationships, in terms of the durability of family units, is bound up in the quality of relationships, particularly at young years. And that's where marriage does have a general success story, not in all families, but also in terms of the way it places fatherhood on a secure footing. And what we often underestimate is the formation of more extensive and reliable kinship networks, where marriage has a good track record. And that's why it's so important, I think, because that goes into those networks which have been fractured in communities and did have impacts, I believe, indeed, in terms of people's lack of association and connection during the riots. In terms of the esteem issue, which I agree with the points that you raised, I think, basically what we're dealing with there, when we talk about children and other young people in troubled backgrounds, what I've come across in my professional experience as well is survival. It's about survival. Kids are just trying to survive. They are sometimes doing the care, and they're in the lead role of surviving, and trying to lift their esteem and call it aspiration is something which happens at an early year age. I particularly commend, we've now got actually Chance UK coming to Enfield and Waltham Forest. Their work between 5 to 11-year-olds, just giving them that idea that there's life beyond survival, with volunteers being involved and helping them 2 to 4 hours per week for 12 months, helping take them out to the park, to the Arsenal, to help see them win, and to other things, but just generally to raise their sights and to also crucially help inculcate boundaries and is very solution focused in the whole approach. And that's also in working with the parent, often the mother as well. So that I think has to happen at an earlier age to help raise esteem and that genuine aspiration. In terms of the house benefit, there is a concern, particularly in relation to vulnerable young adults. I see it with those with addictions and mental health, and that's why I think we need to look in the round beyond the benefit change towards trying to help someone through recovery. It's about housing, it's about education, it's about work and the rest of it, and that's why in that there needs to be a wider level of support and different provision. So I'm with the principle that we, in a limited provision for the state, there are cuts that have to be made. But certainly for vulnerable adults, where the last place that they would have wanted to be was being back in their house, their family house, we've got to find a wider way of using resources, such as the social impact bond, the rest, which goes beyond just simply dealing with the housing. So yeah, I hear the point. We've got to find another way of dealing with that.
Okay, I'm not going to speak about the marriage issue. Sorry, I'm going to avoid that. I think I'll leave that on to Philip. He's probably more best placed to answer that question. I'm going to move on to the second. I think you raised some really interesting points. Just correct me if I'm wrong. I wrote down three key things. We are talking about dysfunctional families, or I was anyway, was what I said. You talked about that this is a community issue, was one. You also spoke about the replication of good work. And the third one, there's a lot of research around this area and what are we actually speaking about today. And then your last point was around self-esteem, that's what it's really about. One of the things I did mention in my speech was the Maslow's, how many of you know what Maslow's hierarchy of needs is? Just show of hands. Okay, awesome. So most of us know what that is. The top of that triangle is self-actualization or self-esteem, when people actually realise who they are, what their purpose is. Now, there are many different ways of getting to that around these troubled families. Now, I don't want to go into all of them. I just want to give you a context of the stakeholders that are involved in rehabilitating or helping these people, as I say, the whole family, reintegrate back into society and have their claim. We've got social services, DAT teams, probation, family intervention, DWP, yacht workers, schools, health service. I mean, it goes beyond. Now, one of the things that I want to say was, I think one of the key things that this government could probably help with is finding a more clearer and innovative way of working in a joined up way with all of these. I think the barriers that we face as an organisation, yes, we promote business. Actually, most of the participants that go through our programme don't always carry on running their own businesses. They actually go back into the labour market because they found purpose, confidence, self-esteem to go and do that. And we use business as a tool to do that. Now, we find it that we're often working against social services, we're working against the job centre. Their participants are being remanded to job centre meetings versus coming onto our programme, even though our track record seems to be better than them at getting people back into work. Now, this is a really interesting example, one. The other thing I really wanted to mention was I believe the frustration here is the gap between aspiration and opportunity. I think that's where we lose a lot of, this is, again, social mobility, we hate the term, but it's a horrible thing. But that is what the gap between aspiration and opportunity really is. And those 4 things that I mentioned, I think we can really use in an innovative and creative way to try and kind of plug that hole in a way. The last thing was about schools. A lot of the people that we work with are not actually in school. So we've got to find a way of getting them back into school. Now, if they have a reason, maybe it's an aspiration to run their own business in plumbing or whatever it may be, that might be a tool to actually get them back into education. Does that make sense if I answer some of your points here? If I haven't, please come and find me afterwards and try and answer some of your questions. There is, I've written a lot of stuff down here. But I think the key here is joined up working and reducing the gap between aspiration and opportunity.
Let's tackle this issue head on. When I say I'm in favour of marriage, doesn't mean I hate everything else. Human beings are creatures of degree, and actually the closer we can come in whatever way to loving reciprocal relationships, the better. And I am not going to invalidate whatever form comes close to that and works for people. Absolutely not. But I would say, and here I differ, I think it's just not true about human beings. It's a weird ideological fiction that things are best when they're made up by yourself. It's just not the case. Human beings are, to paraphrase Newton, every achievement we have is on the shoulders of greatness. Human beings are born into a legacy that is made by other human beings. And thank God it's like that. Otherwise we permanently reinvent tribal war every generation. The very fact that we're born into civilization, which is a structure, which is a tradition, is something we should be grateful for. And the most foundational aspect of human life is unconditional human relationships. And I think marriage, and I think the evidence is overwhelmingly clear on this, that is what marriage delivers. And one of the things that really showed this to me was in the OECD survey of 2010, they charted what young people were frightened of. And Britain, I think, came bottom or second from bottom in 2 different categories. We produced the most unhealthy, most psychologically challenged young people. And the thing that they're most concerned about is the breakup of their parents. And since it's self-evidently clear that marriage keeps people together longer, and since it's self-evidently clear that that works for children, let's accept it as a good. Now, I don't want this to be a right-wing good arguing against left-wing beliefs. That won't get us anywhere. I'm not interested in that. I think marriage is good for right-wing people and left-wing people. And you can have a left-wing marriage. If that involves being nice and agreeing not to, have hierarchy, fine. That's cool.
There is a dating website.
Yes.
For left-wing people.
No.
Specifically.
Does it work? Does it work? Yes. So the point I want to say is, let's not do bad thinking here. And furthermore, a couple of questions. I think one of what's worrying about youth culture is the idea that somehow it's self-legitimating. I don't think it is. I think there's something very wrong about Britain where we have age-segregated space in a way I don't see anywhere else in Europe. Past a certain point, you go into a British town centre, only people of a certain age group are allowed to be there. And everyone else is pushed into homes, alone and separated and segregated. And I'm not so sure this great idea of the separation of a youth culture from any other parts of human life is that good for anybody. And actually, when I travel abroad in Europe, it's actually rather lovely. And what's lovely is when you integrate generations and you create those networks. So let's not fetishize what might already be a type of tragedy, and let's actually accept that actually human beings create good that they pass on to others, and one of those are institutions. So I don't want to get into ideology wars. So that's not what I'm about or what I'm doing. But I accept your point, Alison, so that was kind of what I was trying to answer. I think Stephanie's point about self-esteem it just really hits the nail on the head for me. I think you're right. And it's very, I mean, you all know this from your own families, don't you? I certainly know it from mine. And what's strange is there's members of your family, extended family, who it hasn't worked out for. They have no self-esteem. And then they enter negative circles, and it's part of the human condition. So quite what we can do is very important. But just to end quickly, one of the things that has gone wrong in our society is we've centralised status. So now human beings now think they're a failure unless they're David Beckham or they're, you know, a celebrity or whatever. What we need to do, and you won't be surprised what I'm going to say, we need to localise status. We need to find ways of rewarding the good that people do in our intimate and in our local spheres and make them feel good about it. Because unless we can do that, unless we can re-endow ordinary lives with the grace and beauty they possess, there won't be a way of valuing it, and there won't be a way of addressing that esteem issue. So to sum up, what I want to suggest to you is conservative values in terms of family, institutions and culture are the most progressive values around.
Well, we're coming to the end of the event, unfortunately.
I think we actually forgot to answer one question. This lady's question about leaving home and staying home. None of us.
Well, I think David did.
Did you pick that up? Okay. I just want to say I left home to get away from the situation.
No, and I acknowledge it.
Yeah, we are running out of time, so if you want to carry on conversations afterwards, I'm sure our speakers will be happy to do that. I just want to thank our panel again for providing such an interesting discussion, and also to say that this event is part of the 12-month Commission on Youth that ResPublica and NCBYS are running, and I'm sure Phillip and any of his colleagues at ResPublica will be happy to talk to you about that afterwards, so please do give a round of applause to our panel.